Hey there, all my Rotation 411 astrology initiates. So it's been a minute. Last week was crazy. I didn't have a chance to get on here. Um, but I do have our spot saved for lecture 2, part 3. I know I was getting a little confused last week with the way that she's writing the, like, she'll say Sun dash Saturn, Sun dash Jupiter, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to mean conjunction or just these aspects in general, which really doesn't make sense in the context, right? Because if she's saying like Sun dash Saturn, but then she'll kind of be speaking about the conjunction or the square. So I was getting a little tripped up on that last week. One other thing is I couldn't find my microphone right now because I'm still continuing to organize and move things around and lose them and find them again. So I am on my regular phone. So if we get kicked off, I will be back on around this time tomorrow. Um, I got late today. I want to get on and get this going. Usually I would get on again and it'll say live stream continued, but I'm just because it'll kick off. So basically, if I get a phone call, what happens is even though I kick it out and decline it, it will mute the microphone for whatever reason, and I don't know how to undo that. So if we get a phone call, that will conclude our reading for today, but we will be back on tomorrow for lecture 2, part 4. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and jump into it. There's no one in here yet, so if you're watching this on the playback, let's get into it. So she was talking about a woman who had Sun square Neptune, I believe, and her father was an alcoholic. So she ended up marrying alcoholics. So she says, so if you want to see that part, I'll link the playlist below in the playback, but it's the Outer Planets and Their Cycles book study, Rotation 411 channel, if you want to find the previous videos on this. Let's clear my throat one more time before we get started. Okay. So it says what this woman did is what most of us habitually do with outer planet aspects. We tend to project them into rather distorted forms. Neptune materializes as the alcoholic or the deceitful partner, and Uranus dresses as the partner who leaves you and comes back again usually and leaves again. That's Uranus. And Pluto disguises himself as the partner who has power over you or who has some pretty complicated sexual and emotional patterns. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the like. All right, but I think it's possible to at least try to live these things in one's own life. That can be exhilarating and creative if we can come to terms with the fear. The child with the strong outer planet aspects tends to be singled out when he's young. He's usually the one the other children think is a little weird. So, for example, and I think I kind of mentioned this the other day, Leonardo DiCaprio has Sun trine Saturn. And I read once, because I have that, so, that always makes me relate, but that they're the ugly ducklings of that they can feel like ugly ducklings. So, he was very famous, very young, and a very good actor, but he might have felt a little awkward. He probably didn't go to school with the regular kids, and he even as an adult, I'm not making any judgment on him, but it seems like it's been hard for him to sort of find a mate and settle down. So Saturn can create, whether in a positive or negative aspect, sort of a late bloomer, especially if you have Saturn retrograde in your birth chart. Hey, Racy. Hi, John Wells. Hi, Addison. Gattico. I speak a little Spanish, but I don't think I speak it well enough to explain. El Libre. um, All right, so hi Adriana, we're gonna get back into reading this, but I'll pause every once in a while and read if you guys say anything. So, the child with strong outer planets aspects tends to be singled out when he's young. He's usually the one the other children think is a little weird. He may suffer from a lot of collective pressure in the form of conventional expectations, especially if the outer planet is in a prominent place like the ascendant or the midheaven, and I would say especially if it's Saturn under that definition. Yes, Adriana, I said hi. Hi, Adriana. Okay. So, okay. So the ascendant is our identity and the midheaven is our reputation. The midheaven is sort of formed over a lifetime, but I do see it being present throughout at least adulthood in most people. Because this child answers to a different drumbeat, he is often avoided by his soberer fellows who have aspects like Sun Saturn and Sun Jupiter and Sun Mars and are better adapted to the social order. So maybe she's saying positive aspects. That's why I was telling you, as I was getting a little tripped up on before, is she says Sun dash Saturn, Sun dash Jupiter. So I'm not sure if she's talking about, hard aspects, soft aspects, like trines versus squares, or all of them relating in general. So I'm kind of trying to pick that out and decipher it. That'd be like my one main criticism of this book so far. It makes it a little hard to follow. All right, so let's see. A person with strong outer planet contacts may have a disruptive effect in the group because the outer planets tend to feel threatening to more Saturnian values. So I'm going to say when she's saying strong, she's meaning hard aspects like squares. Um, all right, and maybe like quintessiles. Sometimes you can see the opposite extreme to the woman I just described. The person may get so used to having strangeness projected onto him that he begins to identify wholly with the outer planet. So this could be like someone who's like, I don't really feel like my sun sign because maybe they've been living in their Saturn or their Uranus sign predominantly. All right. Then he becomes the anarchist or the dropout or the renegade against the social order. In pursuing this path to the extreme, he loses the sun. The sun is, our prime life source and identity. That's our sun sign. That's if you are new to astrology, the sign that like your birthday, that's your sun sign. That's the sign the sun was in when you were born. Okay, Shane, we're probably gonna have to uh remove your message because that's a little inappropriate. All right, so I guess I just figured out how to add a moderator though. Hi, Def, not Grace. So might need one of those soon. All right. Um, let's see, where was I? Lost my spot. And he loses a son, which means he no longer has a sense of his own individual values. He is nothing but a mouthpiece for the collective unconscious. And he can be very destructive, not only to others, but also to himself. Outer planet aspects aren't the easiest thing to carry. I think they require a lot of insight. In some ways, it's fortunate if the outer planets aren't too active in the horoscope. I think she's saying horoscope like birth chart. I define horoscope as let's predict what's going to happen next week and next month, like by the transits. But I think she's saying horoscope as in birth chart. I define horoscope as transits to the birth chart. All right. Because you have a better chance for a relatively comfortable, placid, and uneventful life. So it's saying if, like, kind of like I was saying, if you don't have any planets retrograde, your life might start early. But if all your planets are retrograde, like mine, it might start later. You might be kind of a late bloomer, even if you're really ambitious. So this is saying if you don't have very many aspects with the outer planets, your life might be a little more peaceful and serene. Yes, Sky, it's family friendly. It's not, I mean, it's a little above maybe most children's comprehension, but maybe not all children, as far as at least this topic that we're on. But we do the birthday series and everything, so they may be interested in that. All right. Okay, because a very placid and uneventful life. A lot of people value this highly, and I don't think it should be sneered at. So she's probably saying a lot of people, meaning a lot of astrologists. They say like, oh, if you don't have any, hard aspects to the outer planets, you have a really good birth chart. Carl Jung, the psychologist, suggests that the unconscious should be left alone until it starts knocking at the door. And if you are well adapted to ordinary life and have good relationships with other people and are in wild pursuit of some otherworldly vision, meaning highly ambitious, that doesn't mean you're unevolved. It just means you're sound. But if you have a dominant outer planet in the chart, then you must come to terms with it. I think one place to start is to see where it might be projected. Can you guys hear me? I feel like you can hear me. Does this apply to, so the audience asks, does this apply to the sun and moon? Now, before I look at what she says in response, which is, a few pages long, I'm going to say no, because she's talking about the outer planets, and the sun and moon are luminaries. They're considered personal planets in astrology, quote unquote planets. We kind of group them with the planets. Liz Green, who wrote this, says, I think it applies to everything in the chart. We don't only project the outer planets, we also project many other bits of ourselves. It's just that the outer planets are much harder to recognize as quote unquote mine. They aren't really mine or yours. They're an it. And it's better if one preserves that sense of separateness while still recognizing that they operate in one's personal life. If the sun is a thing which is projected, then I think this means the person has no clear sense of himself and his own individual values. He's a collective creature in the ordinary sense, which means a mouthpiece for conventional social opinions and values. So somebody just sort of operating in their sun is going to be someone I'm going to meet and know exactly what their sun sign is upon meeting them. Okay, I'm going to be like, oh, you're definitely a Leo because you just said this thing that I've heard 5 other Leos say in my lifetime, or something like that. All right. So they're just projecting that sun, so the sun is our personality and our individuality, but if we don't have enough other aspects shaping us, then we're just sort of I want to say reverberate. I can't say it right now. So we're just reverberating, the sun's traits sort of generically. And that is our default, if we're just out walking in the sunshine, that's sort of our default, is our sun sign. That's our life force. There's a lot of noises around me. I hope you guys aren't hearing them. All right. All right, where was he? If the sun is a thing which is projected, then I think this means the person has no clear sense of himself and his own individual values. He's a collective creature in the ordinary sense, which means a mouthpiece for conventional social opinions and values. Or he may be a creature dominated by the deeper unconscious collective, in the form of the outer planets, or the 12th house, I like to say, or Pisces energy. But either way, or Neptune, okay, Pisces, 12th house, Neptune, that's all together. But either way, he hasn't got a strong ego, a strong sense of his own person. That becomes his task. And he may rely on others to provide the feeling of individuality in his life. I would say that more echoes the descendant, like the 7th house, whatever you have in the 7th house, whatever sign or planets are there, is what you're going to sort of echo back or have to imitate by default. Okay, so if the moon is projected, then I think the person is very disassociated from his feeling needs. He isn't aware of being related to others and may rely on someone else to do his feeling for him. I won't run through all the planets because I think you can work this out for yourselves. I would say I more agree with her if this is showing up in, again, like the 7th house or maybe the 12th. Sort of the shadow house. And also the house that deals with others. I won't run, okay, but I have found that it's typical, maybe inevitable, that we project the outer planets. Perhaps we always will, and can only accommodate a very little bit of what they might mean. I think it becomes dangerous when we're completely devoid of awareness of them, which is when they behave like blind fate. So this is a really good point, and you all just left me. There was like up to 12 of you in here, but when we just let the outer planets in our birth chart dominate our lives, and that's when we feel like there's other forces that act upon us, or that this is fated to happen. But if we learn, okay, maybe one of you has Sun square Saturn, and you go, okay, I know that in the areas of government and authority, I'm not going to shine. My sun is not going to shine there. So I'm going to avoid authority, or I'm going to learn how to deal with authority in a way that I can sort of still be myself. Just sort of those cures that we talk about. That's being aware of the outer planets. And instead of falling into the trap of maybe constantly having police interaction and getting arrested if you have Sun square Saturn, or having maybe really a strict father that is a government employee that thinks that you should do, be in the government, or is it like very strict military type father? I would say could be a hard Saturn contact for someone. You could just learn, okay, if I don't fight it and I just conform, then in my free time I can be free, and when I'm 18 I'll be free type of thing. So, and then also a big lesson in that would be for someone like that, and this is just one example of many we could make, But Saturn, again, representing the father, in a hard aspect, could be a very strict parent. When you turn 18, you then have to release yourself again. So it's like, okay, you learn to adapt as a child, but then when you become an adult, a lot of people, if they're just living by default of their outer planets, are just going to go into, well, my father was really strict and that's why my life is really hard. But now they're free, right? And once they're out of the house, they could just live their own life, and not continue to feel like they have to live up to the father. That would especially be Sun square Saturn. So that's just an example. We could go through and do it with a bunch more planets. But if any of you want me to cover that more thoroughly, like give us more examples of, breaking free of the chains of childhood through the outer planets, then we could make a video on that. Or if I have any epiphanies, I will. So if you want to look out for my epiphanies like that, do be sure to subscribe to the channel. All right. So anyways, perhaps we will and only comment over. Oh, one more quick thing I want to say while none of you are in here. If you haven't yet, you should enter Moonmatch, the database at moonmatch.love to find your perfect astrological match. Through November, if you use my coupon code rotation411 in conjunction with the coupon code, I think it's thanks24 or thanks2024, it's up on the site, you can get it. You can enter the database for, I believe, $8, which is almost a 50% discount. So definitely get in there if you're interested in, if you're already dating online, then you have nothing to lose by going to moonmatch.love and looking for a real astrological match rather than just sort of going with the whims. A lot of my clients come to me because I work I like to say full-time, but I have so many different gigs. I work full-time, part-time as an astrologist. If you ever want a reading from me, you can go to rotation411.com. But aside from that, a lot of my clients come to me, I've been dating online, I've been dating, I haven't met anyone, I've had a bunch of bad experiences. So if that's you and you're watching this, you have nothing to lose by going to moonmatch.love, all right? And entering the database and running the auto search, because there's quite a few matches in there for you now, all right? And it will only match you with those that you are extremely compatible with astrologically. So you're definitely helping your odds. And again, for some of you, it might be one match, but you can always go back in and check again, or it will notify you if somebody matches with you and writes you a message. So even if you forget about it for a month, and someone matches you, but a lot of you will have more than one match. So, there's still free will and choice, and you can get to know them and decide who's best for you. But anyways, end rant. So if the moon is projected, then I think the person is okay, we already read that. Okay. So it becomes very dangerous when you're not aware of your outer planet aspects, because then it's blind fate. And this is sort of, and we all do this even if we are aware of astrology and outer planets. If you sort of take an inventory of your life and say, gosh, this is the thing that always happens to me. Like no matter what I do, like if it's bad luck, you might have Jupiter opposite Sun or ascendant. And then you could look for cures for that, like whatever sign your Jupiter is in, you strengthen that sign. And you might lose a little bit of your individuality when you're gambling, but you might have good luck if you wear, say it's in the sign of Aries or Scorpio, if you wear red when you're gambling, even though that would be the opposite of you know, Taurus, which would be green, which is the house of money. But especially, okay, so anyways, you can find cures there. Again, if you ever want your birth chart read by me, I should do a gambling, like a luck type of reading though, because if you check out astrowin.org, which I really love, I've worked with him before, in the program on there, he created a winning times thing, and you can go in there and based on your own birth chart or your birth time and place, you can look up the best winning times if you are in gambling, or it can even help you win games. Even he doesn't gamble with money, but he does play virtual Keno, and he wins a lot, 8 out of 8, just when he does it for fun. So anyways, it's kind of a cool thing to play with. I want to play with it more. I'll look it up. Sometimes I'm like, okay, if I go to the store at 11 a.m. tomorrow and buy a lotto ticket, that'd be the best time. But of course, and then I never actually make it there at that time when I get around to looking at it. So, anyways, all right. I should do that though. I should do a gambling reading, helping you project the best times and dates for a month to go buy a lotto ticket. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that. All right. Okay, so I would like to talk now about what happens. And again, you guys, if I kick out, it's because I get a phone call and it will mute me. So we'll be back here tomorrow around 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right. I would like to talk now about what happens when Saturn gets mixed up with the outer planets. The conjunctions of I don't know, it sounds almost like she's not considering Saturn to be an outer planet, but I definitely do. Mm. The conjunction of Saturn with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto represent a group of people all born within 2 or 2.5 years of each other. They are kind of small generation group. Not everyone has Saturn conjunct an outer planet. So if you are in a group that your Saturn, it's like, so if you have Saturn conjunct Neptune in your birth chart, that means everybody around 2.5 years of you has it, and not every generational group has that. So it's not just like everybody has it, but in a different sign. It's every 2.5 years. So you're going to feel not only the affinity with Saturn, because you're going to have that with people for about 2.5 years, you're going to feel it with everyone you have that conjunction. Or if you have that conjunction in your birth chart, then the people around you also have that conjunction, like within 2.5 years. All right. They are kind of small generation group. Not everyone has Saturn conjunct an outer planet. The squares, trines, and oppositions work in similar ways, but I will talk mainly about the conjunctions. So I've said one thing I say sometimes is like, if you have synastry with someone, meaning you have your Saturn in aspect to them, if they're born the same age as you, it's going to be a conjunction, and that's really good for longevity and stability and having like similar values in a romantic relationship. It's not everything. Obviously, you're not going to date everyone your age, but if you date someone your age, that's one thing you will have in your favor. But you know, if they're really close to your age, you'll also have everything in your natal birth chart generationally going for or against you. But at 3 years and 9 years are really good Saturn. I think at 3 years, I was just talking about this with my guy the other day because we're 3 years apart, a little over 3 years. But at 3 years, I think it's a sextile, and at 9 years, it's a trine, but or vice versa. But I always say 3, 6, and 9 intervals. Actually, people that you're 6 years apart with, you have it in a square, and that's not good. Okay, so anyways, or it'll be an approximate 6 years. So for some people, if they're like 6.5 years younger than you might not have it and kind of escaped it. But if they're 5.5 years younger than you might still have that Saturn square with them. So definitely something to look at if you're dating someone who's around 6 years younger than you. And all right, anyways, yeah. So like I have it with. Okay, anyways, I would like to talk about what happens when Saturn gets mixed up. The conjunction. Okay, not everyone has Saturn conjunct in our. The squares, trines, and oppositions work in similar ways. But I will talk mainly about the conjunctions because they're much more obvious. From around May 1941 to April 1943, Saturn and Uranus were conjuncting. They started off in Taurus and they continued to conjunct in the first decade of Gemini, meaning like the first third of Gemini. This is a 2-year generation group. Saturn and Uranus will be conjuncting again at the end of 1986 for around 2 years, starting in Sagittarius and moving into Capricorn. They also conjuncted at the end of the last century, so that would be the late 1800s. There are usually two or three of these conjunctions during the course of a century. There was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Libra from the end of 1951 to the end of 1953. There was another between 1916 and 1918. There will be a final conjunction of Saturn and Neptune this century between 1988 and 1990. There have been 2 Saturn-Pluto conjunctions this century, one between 1915 and 1917, and another from the autumn of 1946 through the end of 1948. And there will be a third between January 1982 and the beginning of 1984. And for those of you that have been following, we also had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, probably at least once in between there, but in 2020. Okay? Let's see. This gives you an idea of the cyclical nature of the conjunctions. They tend to occur around 40 years apart with each outer planet. Sometimes they overlap, which is the case in the late 1980s when the Saturn-Uranus conjunction meets the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Now I'm learning something about my generation. I didn't know that that was just specific to them, the late 80s babies. I mentioned, so in 100 years at least, they're the only group in the late, like around, I want to say, I'm going to have to look now, but I guess it would be 1988 would be the most exact for that. So anyways, it's where they have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all together. Let me see. Mine aren't together. I have Saturn and Uranus in, they're close, but they're in Sagittarius, my Neptune's in Capricorn. So I mentioned before, so I guess Saturn and Uranus must have caught up to Neptune in the late 1980s. I mentioned before that the major movements which arise from the deep collective layers of the psyche run into Saturn first on their way out into life. Saturn is a natural barrier of the ego. I also have known Saturn to represent the father in astrology. The defensive aspect of the ego which tries to preserve its autonomy and its separateness. I would say more so the identity given by the father, like a maiden name or a last name would be, well, Jupiter can do that, represent that too, but I would say that would be the defensiveness of the ego, is this is my, not my identity like my sun sign, which is my individuality and my personality, but my identity like almost like your inherent or given identity from when you're born. Like I'm saying, like your given name. So that's part of protecting the ego, is identifying with what you were born with, you know? It's more apparent in people that like want to claim it, you know, but anyways, but it's also like if you feel oppressed, like poverty, that could be a heavy Saturn aspect. That could also be something that you feel you were born into and inherited, right? You inherently might feel like you're poor your whole life because of a heavy Saturn aspect, because you were born into poverty. So that's why learning, oh, I have this hard Saturn aspect, could possibly break the chains. Just sometimes knowing that. That's why astrology is a very powerful tool. But anyways, people who have Saturn aspecting the outer planets tend to feel the impact of collective currents very strongly and in an uncomfortable way, because there is an urgency to anchor them in order to render them safe. Saturn is concerned with building forms to contain chaotic energies. So a person with Saturn-Uranus must do something with the new ideas that are flooding into his awareness. That would be me, okay? It isn't enough for him just to be forward-looking and eccentric and unconventional, which might be sufficient for Sun-Uranus. Saturn-Uranus has the responsibility of actually constructing some vehicle, because otherwise he will feel perpetually threatened and anxious. Oh, I thought that came from my Virgo moon, the anxiety. I guess it comes from Saturn conjunct Uranus. And Mercury square Uranus. I don't know if he's squaring Saturn too now. That's why I need to have it pulled out. I think it's important to remember that Saturn rules Capricorn. I say that a lot. And the 10th house, the midheaven, and is concerned with the public arena of the world, reputation. I added reputation, just a heads up. Saturn-Uranus is the curious position of having to do something in the world with his social or political vision, but without either losing his sense of realism and worldly wisdom or crushing the vision into too conventional framework. It's very Aquarian, because the traditional ruler of Aquarius is Saturn, and the modern ruler is Uranus. But and Aquarians definitely think outside the box, and they're a lot of fun, and they're great at communicating, and they're great at having big social networks. But if you are close to one, they can be quite overbearing. Like, you can't, once you get close to an Aquarius, you can feel the Saturn. But if you're just cool with an Aquarius, they're pretty cool. Like, they're very Uranian, they're very fun. And if you have a lot of air in your chart, you probably won't feel the heaviness of Saturn as much. But anyways, but if you have Earth in your chart and you're around in Aquarius a lot, you'll probably feel Saturn, I would say, if you have strong Earth. So that's a pretty delicate balance, and you usually find that the person is tipping to one extreme or the other, and finding his enemy, quote unquote, out there in society as either the violently anarchistic Uranus or the oppressive authoritarian Saturn. I definitely can relate to this. Okay. Um, with Saturn Neptune, it isn't sufficient to simply pursue the mystic's path or become an artist or musician and give voice to the images from the depths. Saturn Neptune must make Neptune work in the world in some way, and that's even more difficult than Saturn Uranus because Neptune's diffuse vision of inclusive love is very far away from earthy Saturnian reality. So if you're born in 1988 or like 1989, you have this because we kind of switched from Saturn Uranus to Saturn Neptune now. And you probably have it going on in Capricorn. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I know a couple people born in like 1990 that have their Saturn in Capricorn. So I think that's right. Okay. Okay, many Saturn Neptune people. Okay. The dream of the utopian society is a very urgent vision for many Saturn Neptune people, and they try to implement it by forming alternative social structures such as communes or esoteric groups. Makes sense too why where this generation is very much into esoteric stuff. I say a lot of 80s babies are. I don't know. I think it's always been there. Um, all right. As with Saturn Uranus, it is difficult to stand in the middle and much more common to tip to either extreme. Either the material world is condemned as crass and unspiritual, or the mystical world is condemned as irresponsible and degenerate. And a lot of or not a lot, but it definitely made me think of one person in particular born in 1990 with Saturn in Capricorn. And I don't know that it's conjunct Neptune, but it's probably in some sort of orb there, who just, thinks spirituality is all, you know, for the wolves. Saturn Pluto puts a person in touch with the necessity for endings. Either he must now I'm just getting tongue tied. Either he must perpetrate the destruction of something in society or he must facilitate its transformation. He carries the responsibility of finding a place for the primordial instincts in the world, which means that he has to face both the deep transformative power of the instincts and also their savagery. Very often, Saturn Pluto becomes a saboteur, working towards toppling some entrenched structure or set of values. In many ways, he may find himself the enemy of everything patriarchal, where emotions and instincts have been suppressed for too long. Or he may fly to the opposite extreme and fight the instincts in a very tyrannical way. Saturn Pluto is a very compulsive and obsessive combination because Pluto is a raw force of nature with the most tremendous power. It's not surprising that many Saturn Pluto people are rather paranoid and fear the destructive power of the mass, as well as the destructive power of their own emotional depths. Obviously, if you are quite young, these Saturn contacts with the outer planets can be terribly uncomfortable and frightening. Like I was saying, when you're a kid, but as an adult, that's when you can really learn to work with these. I'm not saying if you're a kid right now watching this, you can't learn to work with Saturn energies. Actually, the sooner the better. But as an adult is when you're really in a even if you don't learn astrology or even go look at your aspects, you're gonna go, okay, I've been through this 100 times. So even a little bit of self-awareness could help you kind of break a pattern with Saturn. A pattern with Saturn. Saturn also gives you more power as you get older because he's the father of time. So he might, I like to think in a way, illuminate things for you as you get older that weren't obvious to you before. That's sort of how it works for me. It'd probably be a little different for everyone, but many people have some form of breakdown early in life because the ego isn't yet strong enough to give shape to the energies pushing in from the unconscious. Of course, we are given absolutely no education from or about these things. So, a person who is being driven a little wild by the pressure of the outer planets is often treated in a very uncomprehending way. The critical factor seems to be the strength and health of the ego. I usually associate the ego with the sun. I'm not quite sure here for her, but one of the ways in which the pressure shows itself is in a tremendous affinity with causes. Outer planet contacts with Saturn tend to reflect a propensity for joining movements in a rather fanatical way. Or sometimes you see the opposite, where the individual feels himself to be the personal enemy of such movements, as though it is where his sole responsibility for stamping them out. Let's see here. Google just wrote me. They are so funny. Like, you have to update stuff with them so often. Anyways, so my mind went to my to-do list. Sorry, you guys. All right. If the person is frightened enough of the impact of the outer planets, he can take the role of Saturn and try to repress all the Uranian, Neptunian, and Plutonian elements in society. Naturally, not every single person with Saturn conjunct Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto will feel the same way and do the same thing. Probably it depends on how strongly the conjunction is placed in the horoscope. The house placement matters, and so do the aspects to other planets. I think the conjunctions represent a responsibility that belongs to a particular generation group. Well, that's an interesting way, like an assigned responsibility, right? And that group will elect mouthpieces who give voice to its meaning. Many people with these conjunctions are quite unconscious of them, but there is a pressure that builds up from the group and it bursts out through the mouths of the spokesperson. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about the Saturn Uranus group born between 1941 and 1943. What happened to them? Who are they? What has this group done with its conjunction? The first thing that occurred to me was that this generation really formed the bedrock of the whole hippie generation. They were also the babies being born, notably during World War II, is what I'm adding there. One of the earliest voices of the enormous cultural movement that has changed so many things in the last couple of decades was Bob Dylan, who is one of the Saturn Uranus group. I think the words from one of his songs expresses nicely the sentiments which began to break through. Quote, "You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing," end quote. Dylan and Joan Baez and the Beatles formed the vanguard of a movement that expressed a political ideology through music. This, I think, is appropriate for Saturn conjunct Uranus in trine to Neptune. The music politics combination was more than just fashionable. It changed lifestyles in an irrevocable way. Morals and religious attitudes and relationships with one's country were turned about completely. It would be hard to overestimate the yeasting effect of these people. The Beatles brought a funny little Indian man who called himself the Maharishi into public prominence, and lo and behold, everyone began meditating. Many things which have now become virtually respectable were for this group initially heretical and iconoclastic. Not only was this Saturn Uranus group giving voice to an ideology, it was also expressing the imagery and spiritual sentiments of Neptune. I think this is why the particular combination of politics, drugs, and music had such an effect. Like I said, Pisces, Neptune, 12th house is very much closely associated with music. If you look up any major musician, they're going to have usually a lot of Piscean energy. If not, I have seen Aries in singers is pretty prominent as well because I think because it rules the head. Taurus too with the throat can be prominent, and the second house is the voice, Taurus. So I would say most commonly I see musicians with very strong Aries, Taurus, Pisces, and Cancer energies. Because Cancer, um, I think it's water signs too. Scorpios are could be very adept at music as well, but Cancer, I think it's just the emotions and feeling the music and the empathy. So usually you probably see someone with strong Cancer, but with Pisces, Aries, or Taurus reinforcing that. All right. And a lot of times when my clients come to me and they're musicians, and like, because if you're going to come to me and ask me about your career, for one, you're career oriented, usually you have a lot of Capricorn in your chart. But if you're, you know, it, if you're going to come spend money to get a reading, most of the time people are going to ask about their love life first. And then, so, you can tell by the topic. So don't not all clients come and ask about their music careers, but most of the time when they do, it is, they do have a lot of Pisces in their chart. All right. Anyways. And I've been putting my finger here so I wouldn't lose my spot, and then I just did. Obviously, Bob Dylan is not the only way to explain a Saturn-Uranus conjunction, but he's a good example. The thing which is most characteristic is not that a singer became popular. That happens all the time. It's that a few people express attitudes which spread like a bushfire. When someone symbolizes something that the collective has secretly been striving toward without realizing it, then that person has enormous influence. I think I came on too late here because I see you guys just popping in and out. So I'm going to pause here for today because my energy levels are low. I have been cleaning and cleaning and cleaning. I just want to get back on here and let you guys know I didn't abandon you, because last week it was just impossible for me to get on. I thought maybe I could pop on Friday, so I had scheduled it, but I removed it to Monday, so some of you may have seen that. A lot of you will watch this on the playback. In the playback, I'll link the playlist for the previous videos for this book, The Outer Planets and Their Cycles, and I'll link it in the description box. I think it's already in the description box actually, but I'll pin it in the comments as well. So thank you for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow for sure, probably around, give or take, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right, I'm sending you all lots of love and light. Don't forget to submit to divinetimingdatabase.com if you haven't already. You can get there. The shortcut is moonmatch.love. Just enter, if you're not ready to join, the actual social part of the site, the membership, just do the entry. And again, coupon code rotation 411. I would love to see you all meet great astrological matches, because I see the opposite quite a lot. All right, love and light.